The way I approach writing in general is very similar to what Whitney's talking about. For me, it's very visual. I'm having to cut things up and throw them on the floor, and then eventually I find there's a pattern. And so the pattern here I realized was, I worked through personal experiences with my mother and father of death, and then what I've been through in the last few years with, I had complete lack of mobility and then rejection as a writer. So this really comes out of a lot of vulnerability and loss and rejection and all that sort of very human things. And the idea of the Bardo state in Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism in particular is a transition state. That we're always in transition. That there's a transition between one, a transition, a Bardo state between one breath and the other. And that life is part of death. And it's quite different to the Western tradition. And I found myself in this essay also coming to, interrogate the Western artistic tradition too. And I guess I started to fixate on Damien Hirst's shark. And I found myself grappling with this shark, like literally. I felt like physically I was grappling with the shark for days and days. So all of that's in there. And I think it combines a lot of what we're talking about, because as artists, we're constantly up against mortality. And how do we imagine our own deaths? How do we deal with the deaths of those around us? And it's a constant sloughing off of the self, and also of the writerly and artistic ego, until the final point again, there is no self. So I'm going to just read randomly, and then you can ask me some things. I touch the pulse point at my mother's elbow. The pulse runs fast. The skin there is fragile and purple black, and I marvel at this frantic thrum of blood. This is death running through her, I realize. Her heart pumping hard. To what? What is her heart doing exactly? What is this marathon of body and spirit? In her final days, my mother still tries to push the blankets away. She tries to lift herself up out of bed. In the Mara crossing, Ruth Padel observes a similar subenhula, an unease or restlessness in migratory birds prior to a long journey. She sees it in the to and fro twitchings in swallows before they grow, as their bodies are first preparing and then impelling them to fly. My mother exhibits this same restlessness. It fires through her veins and elevates her pulse. If a migratory bird is restrained during its normal hours of flight, it flutters and agitates for as long as the journey would last. I see this in my mama. Her eyes are sharp and her mouth is set. She is determined. She is readying herself for flight. And where is she flying to? That is the question. And what is she thinking? What does she imagine at this point? I long to ask, but hold back. Am I more fearful of the question or the answer? At one stage she opens her eyes and says, "This is not how I thought it would go." I think I understand what she means. After nearly 2 months of struggle, this final phase of dying, how did she think it would go? Who can have any idea? How do any of us, if we can at all imagine the end of our own story, think it will go? I continue to feel my mother's pulse. I watch the way her fingers occasionally flutter up from the bedsheet, extending to the far reaches of the room, to something I can't see. The way her eyelids flutter as if dreaming. When I start work 5 years later as a writer in a hospice, I recognize these signs in the patients on the ward. I wonder if the Tsukuhula of the dying person relates somehow to the time taken by the migratory self, the consciousness, soul, energy, light, call it what you will, after death, that the fluttering in our knees relate to the time taken to wherever this energy is headed, that this is indeed part of the preparation of the space-time of death. I'll just move on. The idea of the Bardo is important. A Bardo is best defined as a transition state, and the idea of impermanence and change is central to this concept to Buddhism in general. Arguably, genetic living between on earth is a Bardo state. Every breath, as Fiona Chandron says, is a small birth and death. Major life events and relationships are Bardo states. So too are shifts of circumstance throughout life, beginnings and endings, accidents, lucky breaks. According to Tibetan Buddhist teachings, Bardo states continue after death as consciousness moves to its next incarnation or different existence altogether. In life, though, we tend to see everything as permanent. Our mind clings to the illusion of stability. We also cling to the notion of ourselves as fixed. We cling on even as everything changes around us. Even as our clocks and calendars, our external and internal weather tell a different story. Nothing stays fixed, even though we struggle to maintain the illusion of fixity, even as we struggle to stay upright on ever-shifting ground. I've come to realize that death always happens to someone else, until one day it doesn't. And I know that death will prize me away from everything which seemed to define me, all my judgments, which comprise my world, my seemingly immutable, singular self. And so I must try to accustom myself better to uncertainty and loss while I'm still alive, to practice living in the Bardo. I try to let go. I start small. If I lose a piece of jewellery, say, or if I break a treasured cup. Small is relatively easy, I know. But if we don't start small, how can we accustom ourselves to the big? Everyone I love, gone. Myself, no longer here. As Jung said, the second half of life should be in preparation for death. Toni Morrison notes, writers imagining the unthinkable as a way to liberate the imagination. Just because the idea of our own death seems beyond words, beyond representation, beyond the outer reaches of imagined space, means that we never stop trying to find the words and the means to evoke it. When I sit down to meditate, I confront the insistent self. Often a repeating mantra disturbs the peace. I am a writer, I'm a writer, I'm a writer. But what does this mean? This hard-won identity. Then another persistent hum of thought. I'm an active person. Movement is important to me. These key aspects of what I believe to be my identity fracture and fall into the blue of meditation. And occasionally, when my mind can be still, I allow these thoughts to fall. The sensation, the sound of the classic carving. And then I talk about, in recent years, these twin pillars of my identity. I'm a writer and I'm an active person. Have come under challenge when I lost my mobility and then I was no longer getting published. So I talk about that and my illusions of self and the sloughing off of the self. And the struggle, the physical, psychological, and creative struggle with that. I think if we truly contemplated death, I'm going on towards the end now, instead of something separate, we would all live differently. Our capitalist economies would be challenged. The ecocide, misogyny, racism, and exploitation of people and nature, all would be thoroughly dismantled. But our current social system leaves no time for contemplation of death, and increasingly, no time for contemplation of the life we're actually living. We are, quite literally, distracted unto death. Capitalism exhorts us to embrace cradle-to-grave distractions. We're exhorted to consume, to busy ourselves, to never stop, to constantly improve ourselves and everything around us, to strive and aim and post and like and update. Surveillance capitalism and social media are merely the latest forms of the profit system and its inbuilt, never-ending debt distractions. And then I go on to talk about Damien Hirst and the othering of death in our culture. But I thought I'd just finish off with an experience from the hospice. She's 37 years old, swimming in the middle of her life and death. She wants to write something for her children. She wants us in the art room to help her construct a memory box for them. She has 3 children, and the youngest one, a 12-year-old girl with learning difficulties, is sitting on her mother's bed when I enter the room. I take out the storytelling dice, the sheets of paper, crayons, journal books, and coloured pencils I brought with me, and ask the little girl to shake the dice and tell me what she sees. Each dice has pictures of a person engaged in activity. What does it remind her of? What stories? What dreams? Would she draw what she sees? She loves this game. She rolls the dice and starts immediately drawing a house with herself and her mother in it. She keeps drawing after each roll of the dice, a new frame of the story on a new sheet of paper. From these pictures, she starts to create a narrative of life with her mother, of things they have shared. She speaks out loud as she draws. I ask her if she wants to write these stories. Shyly, she shakes her head. No, could I write them down for her? So I become the scribe. I write everything down as she speaks. We spend nearly 2 hours doing this. These stories of life together and of life to be without her mother, their daily routines, the things they enjoyed. Her mother lies on the bed, in pain, offering up her own memories in a soft voice. I write these down too. They range over everyday favourite things and activities, foods, places they like to visit, the museum, the park, the pool, to cartoons, television shows, things that give them pleasure. A nurse quietly enters the room and gives S a shot of morphine to her stomach. S drifts in and out of consciousness. She has a smile on her face. Her right hand flutters as she tries to sleep. The stories keep coming and I continue to scribe. When the little girl has exhausted herself, I read the stories back as she silently arranges the pictures around her mother's bed. In that moment, S is not dying and leaving this child and her older children behind. No. Here, in that moment, we are deep in the Bardo of life and creating something beautiful and transient, something which has meaning. We are creating something and at the same time letting it go.